Okay, we're moving on to other evidence of a worldwide flood. It's evident that at some time recent, the earth was flooded by subterranean and torrential downpour. Subterranean waters, torrential rainfall. Look at K29.htm. This doesn't want to do that. Try it again. Okay, there it is. 29.htm. Computer has a mind of its own. All right. The earth flooded by subterranean waters and torrential downpour. The expression, the fountains of the deep burst open, Genesis 7:11, points unmistakably to vast geological disturbances, plural, that are incomparable and incompatible with the local flood concept, especially when these disturbances are said to have continued for 5 months. So, on the side of the Bible, there are people who go by the Bible, and then they turn around and reverse this idea to make their point of view compatible with what they call science. But observability, falsifiability, repeatability is not here. It's a model. There's certain things that you can view, but not rule out other things. You can't rule out a worldwide flood just because there's a possibility that all this happened and it took a long time. Lots of water evidence all over the planet. Well, we took a lot of time in that. No, maybe it happened immediately. You can't rule either one out. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, and the 17th day of the month, on the same day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were opened. And the rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. Now, those who go by the Bible, come on. This is not a story. This is an account, an historical account. It's couched in those terms. And the water prevailed upon the earth 150 days. Fountains of the deep burst open, the great deep. It's a lot of water. According to Brown, Driver, and Briggs, the Hebrew dictionary, the word tehom, translated deep in this verse, has the primary meanings of a deep of subterranean waters, sea, and primeval ocean deep. There can be little question that the phrase rendered great deep points to the deep of Genesis 1:2, and the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and refers to the oceanic depths and underground reservoirs of the antediluvian world. Presumably, then, the ocean basins were fractured and uplifted sufficiently to pour waters over the continents in conjunction with those waters which were above the firmament, the expanse, and which poured down through the windows of heaven. It's called rain, lots of it. The scriptures state that this breaking up of the foundations of the great deep continued for a period of 5 months, for it was not until after the 150 days had passed that the fountains of the deep were stopped. Such vast and prolonged geologic upheavals in the oceanic depths cannot be reconciled with the theory that the flood was merely a local inundation in some part of the Near East. Instead, the biblical information gives substantial support to the concept of a geographically universal deluge. So for those who go by the Bible, go with the facts. Then observe that from the point of view of what we can see today. We have seen that most of the Earth's crust, up to and including some of the so-called Proterozoic strata, was probably formed during the period of the creation. Also, there must have been a primeval mantle of soil supporting the luxuriant plant life of the antediluvian Earth. During the relatively brief period between the fall and the deluge, however, probably few deposits were formed, and those that were formed were most likely swept away by the waters of the flood, together with the original soils and other unconsolidated materials. And it is highly probable that many of even the primeval crustal rocks were broken up, swept away, mixed, and eventually redeposited by the tremendous hydrodynamic forces of the floodwaters, which would be more than a mile high and going at hundreds of miles an hour, as well as by the volcanic and other phenomena accompanying them. Can you imagine that? 2 waves smacking into each other at multiple hundreds of miles an hour, depositing those deposits way down the bottom, a mile deep, with all that weight of the water, 64 pounds per cubic foot, I think. And it forms instant fossils and compact rock from sediments. The Noahic deluge was a cataclysm of absolutely enormous scope and potency that must have been accomplished, an immense amount of geologic work that during the year in which it prevailed over the earth. Many of the Earth's present rock strata must have been produced by the flood. Rock, lots of pressure. You can form diamonds with lots of pressure. You can form rock with equal pressure. Granite, sandstone, formed instantly by sediments. Destructive power of modern river floods. Now we just look at that to corroborate. Even the relatively trivial floods of modern experience exert tremendous erosive and tractive pulling forces. This man, Cyril S. Fox, says the astonishing power exerted by a flood of rushing water, both in scouring and transporting material, is rarely fully appreciated even today. He quotes the striking account of floods in northeast India. Just a brief description of the carrying power of flood streams in the Cherrapunji Assam region, which is subject to heavy rain. He wrote, the Wear had risen only 13 feet above the level at which it had stood a few days previously. The rush was tremendous. Huge blocks of rock, measuring some feet across, were rolled along with an awful crashing, almost as easily as pebbles in an ordinary stream. In one night, a block of granite, which I calculated to weigh upwards of 350 tons, was moved for more than 100 yards, while the current was actually turbid with pebbles of some size, inches in size, suspended almost like mud in the rushing stream. In that region, there now is practically no soil on that Cherrapunji plateau, and it is also noticeable that water carrying much mud in suspension and its increased density therefrom carries larger stones than clear water for equal velocities. One must visualize flood action like this not in a limited locale but worldwide, not for a few days or hours but continuing for weeks and months, to appreciate the character of the biblical deluge. On the other side of the world, from Utah, comes an account of another modern flood. On this area, the 1930 floods have destroyed houses, broken the east wall of the schoolhouse, deposited debris to a depth of several feet, including boulders of all sizes up to 20 tons in weight. Some larger boulders were moved for about 1,000 feet from the canyon's mouth down to a 4-something gradient. Several of these weigh from 75 to 100 tons each, and two previously mentioned weigh 150 to 200 tons respectively. The deep gorges, freshly excavated for the full length of the flooded canyons, are no less impressive than the flood deposits in the valley. Cuts were made in typical canyon fill, in places a depth of 70 feet. Long, continuous stretches of bedrock were exposed on the bottom of the channels. The canyon fill consisted of debris brought from further upstream by running water and of materials collected from the adjacent canyon slopes. Included were boulders ranging up to 50 feet in diameter. This local flood. Formation of canyons by megafloods. Amphitheater-headed canyons have been used as diagnostic indicators of erosion by groundwater seepage, which has important implications for landscape evolution on Earth and astrobiology on Mars. Of perhaps any canyon studied, Box Canyon, Idaho, most strongly meets the proposed morphologic criteria for groundwater sapping because it is incised into a basaltic plain with no drainage network upstream, and approximately 10 cubic meters per second of seepage emanates from its vertical headwall. However, sediment transport constraints in dates, plunge pools, and scoured rock indicate that a megaflood greater than 220 cubic meters per second carved the canyon about 45,000 years ago. Well, that's their age. These results in local flood to a growing recognition of quaternary catastrophic flooding in the American Northwest, and may imply that similar features on Mars also formed by floods rather than seepage erosion over many, many years, millions. How about just instantly? So, the name channeled scablands was first used in the early 1920s by geologist J. Harlan Bretz of the University of Chicago, who made a comprehensive study of the region and proposed the idea that the erosional features were the result of a gigantic flood. Although Bretz's concept sparked a lively controversy, most geologists today agree that the scablands were caused by a flood of unprecedented proportions that took place 18 to 20,000 years ago during the Great Ice Age. At least we got some corroboration there, although they go back 20,000 years, and it's not that far. The Spokane flood left its mark along a course of more than 550 miles, extending from western Montana to the Pacific Ocean. But the most spectacular flood features were carved into the black volcanic rock terrain in eastern Washington. This rock, the floor of the scablands, is basalt, a dense crystalline lava that covers more than 100,000 square miles in parts of Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. The part of the lava field that underlies the scablands in eastern Washington is a saucer shaped of about 15,000 square miles, almost completely surrounded by mountains and nearly encircled by three rivers, Columbia, Spokane, and the Snake Rivers. There you go, local. What happens when it's worldwide? In Mars, Becky Ferreira talks about the mega floods in Mars carved Grand Canyons, giant canyons into the red planet. You have these craters here, Jezero crater, site of a Martian paleo lake, on the shortest list of landing sites for NASA's Mars 2020 rover. Mars is currently a barren world of ice and dirt, but at one time catastrophic mega floods of water carved massive canyons across the surface of the red planet. They're not willing, evolutionists say, well, yeah, there's local floods, yeah, there, but not on Earth, really. You look at Mars, and you're closer to Earth, you're standing on it. Some 3.7 billion years ago, she maintains, when Mars was warmer and wetter, there were likely hundreds of lakes and rivers on its surface that may have supported favorable conditions for life, really. These bodies of water are long gone, but they carved out permanent features into the Martian landscape, called paleo lakes and paleo channels, that scientists can study for clues about the watery Mars of the past. Well, now scientists have discovered that some of the ancient lakes burst through their crater basins, causing outburst floods known as megafloods, which carved out wide canyons within a few weeks. The new finding published on Friday in Geology confirms that these flood features, called outlet canyons, were formed on very short timescales and were a major geological force in Mars' first billion years as a planet. So, we don't need a lot of sedimentary, slow-moving water. We can have this happen quickly. So why do you have to go back a billion years? Led by Tim Gouge, a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Texas, Austin, researchers studied 24 ancient crater paleolakes imaged in high resolution by NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. The paleolakes all had breaches punched through the side of their basins where water flowed into outlet canyons during Mars' early days. These Martian canyon patterns match existing models projecting the efforts of sudden megafloods, and they also correspond to real geological features on Earth. In particular, glacial lakes outburst flows, like the Missoula floods some 13,000 years ago, left behind similar features such as the channeled scablands in Washington state. They still can't resist throwing things like tens of thousands of years. Where Mars lakes were confined in crater basins, Earth's glacial lakes are contained within icy dams. Megafloods on both planets occur when these structures are breached or overflow, forming similar outlet canyons. Given the large size of many paleolake outlet canyons on Mars, we hypothesize that lake overflow flooding was an important process for shaping the early Martian landscape, the authors said in the study. For years, scientists have been interested in landing rovers inside these paleo lakes because they are among the most likely locations to find fossils of ancient Martian life. Jezero crater, a 30-mile-wide impact basin that was among the locations Gouge's team studies on a short list of 3 landing sites that NASA is considering for its Mars 2020 rover. All right, so why couldn't these things, the deposit, the water, the sudden water canyons formed and so on, glacial lakes formed, why couldn't they deposit quickly and not over millions of years of fossil strata?